No, every single good cybersecurity professional I know has a Pendleton outfit. That's just the rules.
Yeah.
Nick.
You got to have
I-
the socks from CyberWarCon and then a Pendleton jacket or blanket.
I thought it was like the little puffy coat, the little rib puffy coat.
That's
Is
finance.
that the vest? Just
That's
the vest.
finance. Yeah, if you want to be a fibro, you get the puffy,
Okay.
Patagonia, not Pendleton.
I got mixed up again. Okay, I was in the wrong store. Okay.
It's easy to confuse. Welcome everyone to Coffee Talk. We're going to be doing a cyber fashion review this year from everyone on CyberWarCon stage. Mick and I took photos, and we're going to go outfit by outfit, critiquing
sock by sock.
No, we're not.
Sock. John Holtquist, or as I like to say, the business bear. Discuss. We're going to do about 25 to 30 minutes. We're trying to go on a little bit of a coffee talk diet here, really get down to the nitty gritty. So we're going to start right off the bat with some breaking news from the last 2 weeks. Roll clip.
All right. When you said breaking news, Ryan, that scared me. I was like, did something
DX
happen?
Underground just sent out a whoopsie inbound tweet.
I saw that. So we'll wait and see what's going on.
You'd be doing this live.
Yeah, that's definitely a way to get. It's a good way to get your attention. Inbound, something bad happened. But anyway, we do have a couple news stories to get to today. And the first one is about a ransomware attack that happened last week against the largest bank in China, ICBC. And so this happened last week. It did disrupt the US Treasury market. And the interesting thing is that this actually targeted the US arm of ICBC, which stands for the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China. So that I think is worth pointing out, that this was the US arm, because when I first saw this, I was like, man, I haven't heard about too many major ransomware attacks targeting Chinese companies, right? That's not something that you hear about in the news very often. I couldn't remember the last time I'd heard anything like that. So the interesting thing with this Reuters report is that a representative of the LockBit ransomware group reportedly told Reuters that ICBC paid the ransom. And this information has not been confirmed by ICBC. I haven't seen any statement from the company about a ransom payment, but the ransomware group LockBit provided this in a statement to Reuters on Talks, which is an online messaging app. And so it's interesting to me to see an article based solely on a statement from a cyber criminal group about a ransom payment. And I'm very skeptical of any statement a ransomware group makes ever, because they're not known for being the most trustworthy. So I wouldn't put too much stock in anything that LockBit is saying publicly, because I do wonder, could that be a negotiation tactic if this company hasn't paid and then they say publicly, or could that give them leverage, or would it add credibility to LockBit as a group if they're cited in the media? I don't know. It's just a question I thought of in terms of where do you draw the line with citing statements from cyber criminals in reports, especially when you don't have confirmation from victims, right?
I mean, I also believe I saw a TLP in that same exchange. So look, if everyone respects TLP, that's just how it goes.
That's extra credibility.
These are criminals, Mick.
Extra
they don't care about your laws or your TLP. They don't care what the DHS or.
They respect TLP, Ryan. It's an look. If we don't have TLP, we're savages. Okay. I do, Audra. You and I talked about this a bit before the show. Like, so you published it, and you unable to verify independently. So like you have a sole source, and you let that one rip, and is that the bar now?
Well, that's the question. It's interesting information. I can see why Reuters ran with that as a story, but I also could see if they had chosen not to, because the only information was provided by LockBit. I don't know, but some of the other interesting points about this was the disruption that it caused. It disrupted trading, with the US Treasury market, which I'm reading is now mostly back to normal. But the hack was so extensive that Reuters reports that employees at the bank actually had to switch to Google for their email because their work email accounts weren't functioning. And and that TLP red that you pointed out, Mick, that was a screenshot that VX Underground shared on X that I saw from, I think, I don't know where it was from. I don't know that it said, but it was some sort of message with the LockBit admins, and one of them said, "This is TLP red," but yes, they paid the ransom. So
ICBC background is one of the 4 state-run banks in China, responsible for over $6 trillion in assets globally. It's a huge, huge thing. And you mentioned earlier that it was the English, or the U.S. speaking, U.S. subsidiary. And the only other ransomware attack I can think of inside of China was the HK Daily, which is like a U.S. newspaper. So,
Weird.
Right? Weird.
Well, I would say probably the Chinese media goes to the far left of discussing Chinese ransomware attacks, right?
Really? Because I always thought they were hard right. All right.
We were talking about this. One of the things I find fascinating, obviously, Dragos, we're never victim blaming here. They're friends of the show. Rob's a friend of mine. They were in the news.
But were they actually a victim, right?
This is the question, right? It doesn't appear they were. Or if they were, there's no confirmation, and I don't think we'll get it. But it's like, we had ransomware operators criminal gangs started using ransomware, and it was, we've encrypted your stuff, pay us to get a decryption. Then it turned into, we took your stuff and pay us or else we'll tell people about it. And now the cachet is so strong, they're able just to say, like, listen, we're not even going to do anything, but we're going to tell people we did something unless you pay us.
Now, would that require you to file an 8K as a publicly traded company and say, we've had a material event, somebody said, see, they said they ransomed, but they didn't. They just said, and then took it down a couple of days. But that couple of days, boop,
that's a fascinating one because it does impact your stock price, right? Which is part of what
where we're at now.
I mean, do they do the O.J. Simpson? If the glove don't fit, you must acquit. Like, is this you can't prosecute me you can't file an 8K if it didn't happen, but maybe you have to.
Yeah, I don't know the reasoning for posting a company on a leak site if there wasn't an attack, but like I said, you can't really get into the mind of cyber criminals sometimes because, right? Nervous laugh.
It's Pendleton cheap, let me tell you.
So I also wanted to share this blog that Kevin Beaumont posted today. Let me share it on LinkedIn also. This was interesting because it's also about LockBit and how they've been exploiting the Citrix NetScaler vulnerability that's been dubbed Citrix Bleed. And I just wanted to call this out too because it reinforces the trend with data extortion where these groups are just leveraging vulnerabilities now very commonly. There was Clop, right, with all of those file transfer 0 days from Excellion, Go Anywhere, Move It, and then WSFTP, right? Those were all exploited by ransomware groups. And now we're seeing this, which is being used to target large companies. So definitely worth a read if you're interested in that. But I do wonder how this trend is going to continue with vulnerabilities and how that will, in terms of initial access with vulnerabilities versus like phishing and other methods. So
I do feel like it is the new Wild West there, certainly this summer, right? What was it? I think Joe Slowick on your recent to be released podcast called it the Hot Summer, the Summer of Hot TV, Hot Summer, 0 Day Summer. It feels like every day, once again, not victim blaming, but it feels like every day it's a Fortinet, it's a Citrix, it's a VMware exploit that people are dealing with. They're having to have this initial ingress. A lot of these are externally focused. They're externally hosted application servers or network devices that people are coming in on. If you don't have to spearfish, why not? Certainly spear phishing detection still #1 ingress, but you can get in.
I also wanted to point out too, Dr. Ryan Fetterman on our team at Surge, he did an analysis of MITRE attack techniques that I can link to it when I find the blog. And one of the findings when he compared techniques reported among different public and private reports was in 2023, exploiting publicly exposed applications was the #1 cited technique across the reports that he read. So that, and it moved up. It wasn't previously. Right. Yeah. So that kind of follows that same trend of that becoming a more common technique for initial access. Let me see if I can find that because it's a good.
If your admin server is exposed to the internet, I just feel like you're doing something wrong at this point.
Do you have zero trust in their ability to manage that?
I mean, I don't leave my front door open or unlocked for a reason, right? It's just they're the basics. So those core things we keep talking about. And a lot of the vulnerabilities, they are bad, but it comes from just those core principles we're not following.
But sometimes that's hard, right? Like, you might lock your front door, but you're in a row of houses, right? Maybe you have a balcony and you leave that balcony your top floor. You're like, hey, that's fine. No one's going to get in through there. But turns out your neighbor left their front door open, and then they came through that.
Oh yeah, and that's the third party, everything like that we're talking about. It's an ongoing issue, and it doesn't mean that don't lock your door, right?
Yeah. Lock your door. Hide your kids. Hide your wives. Put them under the bed. That's everybody. No, I thought the ICBC, the China part, ransomware is just not going away. But, do we care about ransomware anymore? Have we moved to a post-ransomware? What's our next story, Audra?
Well, so now we have a group of stories. We used to have a ransomware roundup, and now we have a, conflict coverage, cyber and conflict, geopolitical stories, which is a big topic right now. And the one that I wanted to highlight first is a report from Mandiant that came out last week, which is very interesting. This is about the Sandworm threat actor, a Russia-linked threat actor, who they attribute to a cyber attack that happened in late 2022, which targeted critical infrastructure in Ukraine. And so this, apparently this actor, Sandworm, used living off the land techniques to target operational technology network to trip the victim's substation circuit breakers, which led to a power outage, which is very interesting because I actually just talked with Joe Slowick over at Huntress about this for our podcast. We talked about attacks on OT networks and how rare and difficult they can be. And so this is an example of that. Sandworm, which was also behind the 2016 Ukraine event, which targeted an electrical substation in Ukraine, which also caused a power outage. But the interesting thing about the 2016 attack was that was actually, it was in Destroyer, and Joe's analysis of that malware was that it was not as efficient as it was designed to be, which we talked about in the podcast, which I recommend people listen to. But back to this report, so there was the OT attack, which caused the power outage, and then there was a second stage in the attack where they launched a new variant of Caddy Wiper, which is a wiper malware, in the victim's IT network. So this was an IT and an OT targeting attack. And I just, it's just interesting because this also coincided with mass missile strikes on Ukrainian critical infrastructure, which also ties back to another podcast interview. When I spoke with Dmitry Alperovich, he talked a lot about coordination or lack of coordination between kinetic and cyber attacks in Ukraine. And so this could be an example of potentially coordinated attacks. Or lack of coordination if the attacks inhibit each other from working out, if that makes sense.
I think one of the things that ties to our previous conversation here that I thought interesting is that this attack on this OT infrastructure, once again, the ingress was via IT, right? It was an exposed web server where someone put in a web shell, and then they started pivoting across until they got to a point where they could actually go from a SCADA system and execute through the hypervisor using some tunneling malware. Like, this is, once again, it's, the ingress, spear phishing, or accessible external server, and then they're deploying the really interesting, this is a significant investment in time and money to go after these OT, but it doesn't mean people aren't doing it because the value during a cyber conflict is huge. It's something, Mick and I were at Cyber WarCon last week. This came up. Mandiant actually had a talk on this. This came up pretty consistently around wipers. I think we're going to relabel Cyber WarCon to Cyber IO and WiperCon because that was 90% of the content. But when you're talking cyber warfare and you want to have an impact, wipers are
degradation,
disruption, right?
Yeah,
I mean it's fantastic research. It's team out there, Tyler, Chris, the whole group out there did fantastic work on this. The presentation was great as well. But it's Sandworm, right? It's the offensive arm of the GRU. 74455 has been around for a long time, and they're super good at whatever they get targeted and sets forward to. it goes back a really, really long time, and I think they get better. And this attack shows that it's actions on objective. It's anything to get there, and this is a really, really novel approach. And I think we'll see variations on it moving forward.
Would you call them go-getters?
Sure. But I think Wiper is going to be a new pedantic argument in the APT community.
Yeah, and this actually leads into our next story, because the question is, will we see more attacks on OT networks? Because they are difficult to carry out compared to like an IT attack, right? In terms of what we've seen thus far. And so Volt Typhoon is another topic that came up twice, I think, at CyberWarCon that you both attended. And this is a China-linked threat actor that Microsoft released a report about earlier this year that's believed to be targeting critical infrastructure in the US and potentially pre-positioning against that critical infrastructure in the event of a future conflict. So not only is this, typical espionage type operations, but this could be used for disruption or destruction in the future if there is, for instance, an invasion of Taiwan, which escalates into a conflict. And so 2 representatives of the NSA spoke at CyberWarCon and really just issued a warning, reiterating that network defenders need to be on the lookout for this, and that this adversary, Volt Typhoon, is highly sophisticated and reemerged in August of this year and has upped their operational security, so they're more difficult to detect. And so that was kind of a reminder that this is still an urgent issue to focus on. And then I believe 2 employees from Microsoft also spoke at CyberWarCon about this, and that's when they updated that they had seen this actor reemerge in August with the OPSEC improvements. So what do you make of this, Ryan and Mick, that this is, how concerned are you about this into the future?
Mick, you're the resident Chinese expert for APT threats on the team, or even at Splunk, one of the world leading. What are your thoughts here? Is this new to you?
No, but like it does shape a narrative depending on which way you want to go. I think if you listen to Audra's podcast with Dimitri, he touches on a lot of salient points about the ongoing conflict with China and Taiwan. And if you were pre-positioning, a lot of people, I think, might misinterpret what that means or what the end goal for that might be. Like if I want to put boots on the ground and that's my goal, if I invade Taiwan, and by no means that's we're thinking that's going to happen, in my opinion, but if that does, you would certainly want to disrupt the response time of like your next biggest ally, and that would be us. So it makes sense. But I think the other point we saw in the theme in the talks was there's been no activity, like offensive activity, from the footholds that we've seen.
Something that I've always seen with APT threats is when you have near peers doing APT threats, you don't have a lot of reaction from each other. Everyone's just kind of it's the great game, right? There might be some sword rattling with diplomatic talk, but there's no sanction.
Great game goes on.
Yeah, the great game goes on. England is still in Afghanistan, 1875 sort of deal here with Russia, right? We're looking at a place where this is a Cold War, this is a proxy war, and this is something where people's lives, as of so far, have not ended because of it. And I think the OT side is where people have been more circumspect in this, right? Like we haven't had that yet from a near peer against each other that we know of. And to your point, like Audra, when she recorded that podcast with Joe and Dimitri, we were like, part of the conversations we all had was like, well, actually it hasn't happened very often. There's only been this one occasion. And then you had to actually put a disclaimer in the podcast.
Well, because it was literally 24 hours later. I interviewed Joe, and of course the next day Mandiant releases this report. It's terrible timing.
Fantastic time, but it goes to illustrate the point, like, hey, cyber is an official 5th domain of warfare, and it's clearly taken a main stage in several conflicts we've seen globally, right? When you look at the Russia-Ukraine conflict, there is a very kinetic end state to this, whereas on the China-Taiwan side, I don't think we've seen that just yet.
Mm-hmm.
And, we can even look, in the podcast that you'd run with Kirsty Payne as well, the security detail.
Man, we are chilling. We're doing it today, Audra.
Listen to my podcast, okay?
Well, this is dead on. I mean, the next 2 episodes coming out, absolutely. I just listened to them this morning on a bike ride. They were phenomenal. And, Audra talked to Joe about OT threats, and then Kirsty Payne talks to a gentleman from NATO who helps run the cyber infrastructure there. And what does an Article 5 event mean, right? An Article 5 event means that, hey, we are calling upon this alliance to help us defend against a threat. It's only been done once after 9/11. But Albania, actually, Audra, why don't you go through this? You kind of discuss this more.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing is that, like you said, cyber is a domain of war. And after Albania was victim of a cyber attack that they attributed to Iran, the prime minister of Albania reportedly weighed invoking Article 5, which is essentially an attack against one NATO member is an attack against all. Didn't end up going through with that, but the fact that that was part of the initial response and the consideration just kind of reinforces that it's not too far out to think of that as a possibility. And when we talked to Luke O'Brien at NATO, that was something he mentioned, that NATO does have that in terms of their conversations about doctrine and NATO's position in the alliance with cyber attacks. So it's an interesting conversation. People should definitely take a listen to it. It comes out tomorrow, the interview with Luke. And Kirsty and him talk about all of the different exercises that NATO carries out with cyber. There's so many of them. And just in how big NATO is. I actually wasn't aware of how many different organizations within NATO exist.
Yeah, it's huge.
Yeah.
One of the things I find interesting, if you do a little bit of a thought experiment on this, is in this case, Iran allegedly attacked Albanian government websites, but not their OT infrastructure. Mm-hmm. Like, what is this line in the sand there? Had they actually caused civilian deaths through a water plant, or like people dying as a result of electrical plants going out and the heat? Albania is very cold in the winter. This is the area. There's some great work done by CCDOE, right, which is part of the NATO. Yeah. This is the cybersecurity defense of, I can't remember. Anyway, look it up, CCDOE conference. They write really long treatises on this, where people are looking at writing essays of at what point do we have a kinetic response to a cyber attack. It's fascinating to me, and I think it does differ. Like, Iran is not a near peer to Western nations for military abilities. China is. Would we have a different response accordingly? This will happen in our lifetime. It's going to happen within the next 10 years, probably, if we look at Ukraine as an example. I'm fascinated by it and what we're going to see. And it's not slowing down.
Yeah, definitely. And one other story I wanted to highlight real quick, just to point this out with Israel and the conflict in the Middle East, is that Israel's Cyber Defense Agency over the weekend released indicators of compromise on wiper malware that's being used to target Israeli organizations that they believe is being carried out by Iran. And so I thought that was worth highlighting as well, because we definitely see Ukraine doing the same, that they've been doing that in the past with releasing IOCs and different information to help network defenders more broadly. And so to see this from Israel, I thought was interesting and worth pointing out.
And we'd love, we got some people in the comments here. Howdy to Tristan. Thank you so much for the compliment, Tristan. It is a lovely sweater.
Encourage him, bro. What are you doing?
Wonderful. Hi to Sergi, to Valerie, to Ramon. If anyone wants to ask any questions, Mark, please feel free. This is a fascinating subject to us. And we've actually done this. Mick and I have done this in the real world. And now we both feel bad because Audra knows way more than we do on her incredible award-winning podcast with Kirsty Payne. But feel free to kind of jump stuff in as we go through. We talk a lot about these. There's, we're doing some research for Gov Summit that Mick and I are going to be presenting on the behalf of Tamara Chacon around the basically how generated spear phishing works. And one of the things we talked about is which nations to kind of look at. And there's really, there's the big 4 or 5, right? When you look at cyber powers and you look at what CISA puts alerts on, you have North Korea, you have China, you have Russia, you have Iran, and then you start going into the US, right? Like, these are the 5 major powers that tend to use cybersecurity one way or the other, allegedly, for the US. I've read some things from Kaspersky that imply we have capabilities, whether or not it's true.
Of course.
That 5th domain, but one of the things I find interesting or fascinating about cyber warfare is it is a low-cost thing for asymmetric warfare by comparison. You know, one F-35 fighter is $95 million. For $95 million, you can have a hell of a cyber capability.
It's true. But at the same time, launching a drone attack against a target is a lot easier than launching an OT attack with kinetic impacts, right? So there's different use cases, right, where it makes more sense for kinetic versus cyber. But I guess that's the question with conflict, and that was the question at the start of the Ukraine war, was what role would cyber play in this? And so, you know, intelligence gathering is another aspect that we touch on in the podcast. So,
you have a podcast?
Yeah, it's probably the too many times mentioning it, but
haven't heard.
We're end of year metrics, people. If you love coffee talk, if you care about our careers and our futures, please go to that link. I'll sing you a Sarah McLachlan song later.
Well, let's go ahead and go to our graphics, because I think we have a QR code too. So we can promote, we can promote it again.
Good timing for. Look,
there you go.
What happens if I scan that QR code?
Oh my God.
It's not malicious. I promise it's not malicious.
Where does it go?
This goes to Podbean, I think. Yeah. But you can find it on Apple or Spotify.
Podbean.ru. Yep.
So the interview with NATO is tomorrow that comes out, and then 2 weeks from tomorrow is when we have the interview with Joe. Yeah, and we have a whole bunch of other episodes. I think this is episode 12 or 13 at this point. So, and then I think we also have some upcoming events to get to, if that's right. Yep. So Gov Summit, which Ryan, you mentioned the research on AI, spear phishing for Gov Summit that's coming up next month. That's exactly a month from today, which is kind of crazy. And then .conf in June. Mark your calendars.
We're also going to be at RSA. We just haven't figured out what we're doing there yet.
RSA's on there. It's in April. Yep.
And then several of us will be at the SANS-CTI Summit, but it's more of we'll be gathering rather than presenting at SANS-CTI. So we have some other things.
2024 tour. Yeah.
There we go. It's going to be great. 2024. It cometh. And then, as always, please sign up to it. If you love this, these sort of shenanigans, if you love Wombat Facts, if you want to hear more about the research that we're talking about, get in depth, please sign up for the splunk.com/search newsletter. It also will send out alerts if anything breaking news is occurring. We'll be able to throw them out there.
Perfect. Let's go ahead and transition to our 60-second charity challenge. If we
And now, Splunk Cybersecurity 60-second charity challenge. Remember the rule: in 60 seconds, or you donate to today's charity of choice. Good luck.
Alrighty. So
I think those guys, they need to be concerned about OT attacks, because looking at how much they were integrated into that nuclear capability with computers, I'd be concerned if they've properly air-gapped myself.
Air gap is not the answer, Ryan.
I feel like that's a t-shirt right there. Air gap is not the answer. Audra.
Yeah. Anyway, that's a whole nother conversation. What, Mick?
Like for a Site R or something like that, right? You can't just go in and rebuild everything. You built it in a mountain.
Yeah. It's not going to be easy.
That's fair.
It's mountain gapped.
Mountain gapped. Mountain gapped is the answer. Ryan, do you want to introduce the charity for today?
Sure. For those of you who don't know, Mick and I are both Navy vets, and a lot of people on our team for Surge are either former military. Johan Bjerke, beloved Johan. He's a veteran of the Swedish military. Tamara is actually married to an active duty sailor, and Drew Church, who's kind of a Surge +1 for the family. He's actually actively deployed right now on a ship in the Mediterranean for reserve duty. So we salute you, Drew Church, and we also wanted to make sure we support all the folks who are serving and who have served. So the Navy and Marine Corps, very special to me. It's something whenever anyone asks me thanks me for my service, I give them a QR code and say thank them for their service, and feel free to donate. Put your money where your mouth is. So something important to all of us.
Yep. That's great. And for today's challenge, we are going to look at information operations, IO.
Influence operations.
or influence
Worse.
operations. Information.
This came up multiple times.
Let's clarify this for a minute. Information operations versus influence operations, because the charity challenge is to define what is an influence operation. And is that different than an information operation?
That was the challenge was?
Are you influence operating us right now? We thought it was, should network defenders care about influence operations?
That's the second part of the question. So
the two-part challenge. Wow.
Yeah,
I have 3 minutes.
it's in the rundown. I typed it out. It says, what are they? Should defenders care? That's the question.
Okay.
So
well, Mick is going to have to go to ChatGPT real fast to go
Wait,
through.
I'm still confused. What's the question? Oh, wait, what is the challenge?
the challenge is define what an influence operation is, first of all, for anyone watching who's not as familiar. What is an influence operation? Is it the same thing as an information operation? And why should defenders care?
According to Rand, who seems like they would know, since I'd argue they would know. Yeah, they would know. Information operations, also known as influence operations, include the collection of tactical information about an adversary, as well as dissemination of propaganda in pursuit of competitive advantage over an opponent.
Yeah, I always thought of them as the
Rand Corporation.
You are correct.
They have thought this out.
It's the same thing. I wasn't sure how they'd be different. So now that we got that out of the way, we can focus on why we care. Why do we care about influence operations, especially from a network defender point of view?
Well, I believe for once I won last year, or last year. The last time I won.
A year ago.
Mick, I'm going to make you go first this time because I've been on meetings since we determined what this is. So I will just copy you. Take credit for my incredible work.
So why should you care? All right. So I guess I'm looking at all the news that's going around recently, and I'm going to focus on India. And if you don't know where India is, it's a country with a population of about 1.4 billion people. And out of those 1.4 billion people, 75% are teenage or older, and around 470 million have social media accounts, so more than the entire population of America. Now, stick with me on this one. If you look at Section 69 of the Information Technology Act, in India, what it does is it puts certain platform providers in a really, really weird position. So it makes them criminally liable for content on their platform they didn't take down at the request of the Indian government. So the reason why I mentioned how many people have social media accounts in the population, because I think so goes India with these regulations. You'll see more countries follow behind in that. And that is going to be a tool to combat disinformation online and IO online at the request of the government. You'll see more and more of it. And that is why defenders should care so they don't go to jail.
Interesting.
Solid. All right, let's see if the timer works for me. So a lot of times I default that network defenders shouldn't care that deeply about influence ops because they really should be more concerned about things like patching their servers or just getting their users not to click on things. So this is something that I had to think a lot about. But the reason I think the network defenders should care about influence ops, and the reason I think every person in the world, especially in Western democracies, should care about influence operations is because there are organizations and governments that are extensively and exclusively trying to influence how we as citizens think about our own country and about our network defenses and why we should care or not care about them. You can see this within the concern that is actually around TikTok. It's not that you have spyware on your phone. You could argue that every app you put on there is spyware. What we're concerned about for TikTok is that the Chinese government has a controlling stake of TikTok, and it could subtly influence how our youth, how our children, how our millennials are looking at the world. And those are the reasons that we should care about influence ops, because it changes your perceptions of reality and how we citizens exist.
All right. So anyone watching, please weigh in.
We know there's a difference here. Enket, hello from India. Hopefully that wasn't directly targeted to you. Mick does like to just throw himself out there and hoping he gets every sort of a bit of voting. But Daniela, for you, the voice of goddess here. What are your thoughts on influence ops? Have you heard about these before? Is it something new? We'll wait for you to come off mute. I know we always throw this to you and you're surprised and shocked.
I've heard from it, and I think I have my thoughts were in line with what you were saying, Ryan, like the importance of how it affects this or as a society. There's a lot of things that the internet has been really good for, but then there's also a lot of things that I think have been getting worse since we have all of this access and misinformation and the capability to influence is one of those that we just should not stop paying attention to.
Yeah, that's one part that neither Mick nor I kind of hit on, but people should conflate or should associate disinformation with influence ops. For me, influence ops is more strategic. It's something being run, like you're having a sweaty basement in Moscow where they're intentionally trying to change the public opinion about a candidate or about our feelings of Ukraine or Taiwan or whatever it be. But the output of that could be disinformation. It could also just be, someone doing their thing and talking about, how much they hate vaccines or whatever it be.
What if I have a new snack line and I really want you to come to my restaurant and try my new snack line? Would that be IO as well? Or is
That's
that
called
just
marketing?
advertising?
That's called marketing.
Those are, because there are influencers and then influence ops.
We are
influencers do not do IO or do IO?
I don't know.
Why not
I hadn't really
both
thought
dot
about
kit?
it.
There we go. Well, we have a nice sneaker collection, so I think that's a plus. That's a 0.5, but that's canceled out by my awesome sweater. So we're back to 0. Audra, you're going to have to do the hard yards today and pick the winner.
That's hard. I think you both had good arguments. I think I might go with Ryan because I know. I think the reason why is because I think everyone should care.
I cited Indian code today.
I know. Well, maybe can we say you both win? Is that?
I mean, we are both veterans. We will both donate to
very
a
happily.
organization. I really don't see anything wrong with that. Yeah,
absolutely. We can both be winners today, or both be losers, depending on how
we're
you look.
both veterans. We both have knee problems. That's exactly what that is.
Have you gotten the targeting advertising for AFFF yet, Mick?
Yes, I have.
Those who don't know, Instagram definitely doesn't do influence operations, but it has figured out that I'm a veteran, so I get very targeted adverts that there's a class action lawsuit for AFFF, which is a type of fire retardant that they use on a ship to put out
electrical fires.
And apparently, if you were exposed to it, you're probably going to get cancer. So definitely hasn't happened to any people I know.
Explain how this also works. You have a bunch of adolescents, 19, 20s, early, just spraying foam at each other because you're at sea for months at a time.
Have you seen that scene in the Zoolander, the documentary?
With the gas?
Yeah, that's pretty much us.
Yeah.
Wake me up before you go, girl.
No concept of safety at all. So it's sad. Yeah, but I get those adverts as well. Also the ones for, do you have lower back pain? Again.
Yeah. There we go.
I guess you could argue that watching the podcast is my influence operation.
I don't disagree.
Inserting it into every conversation. Yeah, it's interesting. I guess. Okay. Yeah, what is an influence operation? I got to rethink that now with influencers.
Sounds like a deep dive Thursday episode we'll have to do in the future. We'll find someone who focuses on it and ask them the hard questions.
Yes.
Until then, we will be back next week. Who's our guest for next week?
Kat Self. So David Bianco is actually interviewing Kat. And so we'll have that next Tuesday.
Kat Self is one of the leads on the MITRE ATT&CK team. Yes. She's absolutely phenomenal, incredible, charismatic speaker. Actually, first time I met her was speaking with David Bianco at the SANS Threat Hunting Summit when she worked over at Target with David. So incredible woman, very smart, very erudite. Should be a great episode.
Yep. So that'll be next Tuesday, and then we'll be back. Well, I won't be, but we'll have another Coffee Talk episode the following Tuesday. And then we'll have our threat research team on for an interview in December. So stay tuned for that. Yeah. Is there anything else, Ryan, or is that all we have?
I think we should close it out. Thanks everyone for coming. And
wait, what are we here for? Yeah, have a great Thanksgiving if you celebrate Thanksgiving.
Oh yeah, that's next week.
Yeah. Time has no meaning, right?
Right.
Nubs. Tune the nubs. It's a weebly wobbly.
You worked so hard, Audra. I forgot there was a holiday.
Not for you.
You know, I'm just focusing one day at a time, right? I can't look a week out. It's too far away.
Oh, well, hope you get a break that he doesn't notice.
All right.
Well, thank you, everyone. Take us away, Danielle.